In most of our episodes, we talk about the toll murder takes on not just the victim, but family, friends, and communities. There's the awful experience of the crime, and then the long drawn-out, emotional aspect of a trial, and for many families, the appeals process. But what happens to a family and a community when an awful crime happens, and the police are unable to answer even the most basic questions, much less the big one, who did it? In this episode, we talk about an unsolved crime in San Luis Obispo and explore the emotional and life-changing experience of never getting answers to a crime that changes your life forever. Welcome to this episode of California True Crime, the murder of Marina Ruggiero. Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of California True Crime. I'm Jessica, and I'll be your host for this episode. Charles is here with me in the studio. How are you?
I'm doing good.
And Sean is joining us in his studio, Chateau Walnut, and this is a especially sad night because it's his last night recording from his studio. How are you doing, Sean?
Oh, I'm sad that I'll be not having this studio anymore, but it'll be for the better.
I'm sad because we haven't gotten to say goodbye. It's the place where we started this podcast, and COVID ruined it.
Yeah, we had our first meeting there at Chateau Walnut, recorded our first episode.
Yeah, and it's one of those sweltering nights that you guys probably miss. It's because you have to turn the air conditioner and fan off. It is really, really hot in here right now, but I'll be moving, and it's for the better, and I have to, when my new studio comes, I'll be in a closet, which will be awesome, so we'll go from there.
So this episode is in another unsolved crime. This will be our fourth unsolved crime, including the murder of Evelyn and Alex Hernandez. Sean covered the Ketty murders, and of course, Lamb Park. We always include an unsolved crime in our episodes, but mainly we focused on ones that haven't got a lot of the kind of attention other crimes in our episodes have gotten. This one is really similar, so hopefully you can bring attention to this murder.
I think it's always hard because it leaves you hanging, and then after we go over it, I think about it all night long and try to figure it out. So it's always hard.
Yeah, I think that the hard part too is that sometimes with the research, especially some of these cases, finding out that they maybe weren't necessarily well covered in the media makes it a little bit harder. And then the idea that we've talked a lot about those cases where somebody was arrested and prosecuted and the family was able to have some closure. It's really hard reading some of these unsolved cases where the family's still struggling with trying to find that closure and find justice for their loved one.
And this one we're going to cover tonight is a little like the Hernandez case in that there hasn't been a lot of attention, like nationally or in the state paid to the crime, which was surprising for me. So for the information in this episode, it came mostly from the Tribune, which is a San Luis Obispo newspaper, and by the News Pilot, which is a San Pedro newspaper. So the crime we're talking about is a murder that happened in August of 1991 in San Luis Obispo. This is the first time we've covered a crime in this city, so let's talk a little bit about the city of San Luis Obispo first. San Luis Obispo is, at least in the true crime community, a city you've heard of because of a famous and unsolved kidnapping, that of Kristen Smart. News came out at the beginning of this year that there may be some movement on this case, and we really hope for the sake of the family that that's true. I always think of San Luis Obispo as a big town. It really isn't. In 2018, the population was almost 47,000, which is not that different than in the 1990s when this happens. It was about 42,000. It's just not a city I've visited very much. Sean, on the other hand, knows a lot more about the area. Can you tell us about San Luis Obispo?
Yeah, so San Luis Obispo, also known as SLO, to a lot of people. It's a coastal city in Southern California. It's almost in the middle of San Francisco and Los Angeles. San Francisco is north and Los Angeles is south. Like you said, it's not that big of a city it's well known, but I think it's probably just because of the things that you can do there. But yeah, like you said, there's only 46,000 and there's a lot of tourist attractions that are there. One is the, missions that you had to build, the fourth grade sugar cube thing. One of the missions, the Mission San Luis Obispo del Tolosa. There's also a lot of other things to do in San Luis Obispo. You have the famous Madonna Inn, where every room is themed differently. Hearst Castle is located there. There's a lot of wineries, and you also have Pismo Beach, where I've never gone to Pismo Beach because I don't dune. Is that what you call it?
I do not know.
Is that the right?
We don't actually go to beaches very much either.
There's something called Bubblegum Alley, which is 70 feet long and 15 foot high, and it's an alley that is lined with chewing gum. There's different stories on how the alley came about, but it's like different high school rivalries or something like that. They've cleaned it twice, and it still stands. So if you want to go stick a piece of chewing gum there.
I actually did stick a piece of chewing gum on Chewing Gum Alley.
Nice.
It was a Wrigley's gum, actually.
It's a pretty white city with almost 85% making up the population. The weather is pretty much like any coastal town with outliers here and there. It can be really hot. You have rolling hills, beaches. It's just nice scenery. It seems like a nice place to live. But the median house price is around $615,000. So that's pretty expensive for a house. In pop culture, scenes from My Blue Heaven starring Steve Martin and Rick Moranis were filmed there. It's a good one.
Have you seen that, Jessica?
I have, actually.
Oh, I think this might be a California true crime first, that all three of us have seen the same movie.
Famous people that were born or lived there at some point is heartthrob Zac Efron. You have house producer Wolfgang Gartner. Jack Kerouac was from there. Mike Krukow, who is one of the announcers for the San Francisco Giants and also played. Other artists like bands. Weird Al actually went to school there. So I know he claims Linwood, but he went to school there. And then there's this band called Rodriguez. It has nothing to do with that documentary Searching for Sugar Man Rodriguez, but it was this band Rodriguez, huge influence on me back in the day. You had M. Ward, who went on to it was a band that like made other bands after because they only had one album. But M. Ward, who also did She and Him with Zooey Deschanel, and then Kyle Field, who started Little Wings. I got to talk with Kyle a couple times. Rodriguez, they had one album called Swing Like a Metronome, and it was amazing. And Jason Lytle from Granddaddy produced it, and it was released on Devil in the Woods, the label, which was the same label that my old band was on. So we were label buddies in a way. But it's a hard album to find, but if you can find it, it's really good. Also, I don't have many experiences in San Luis Obispo, but another band I was in, we went on a small tour and we played at a place called Z Pie, and it was a chicken pot pie place. It was amazing because they gave us chicken pot pies for dinner, and then we played a show, and we stayed at our friend Vach Levi's house that night, and he's another notable person from San Luis Obispo. He lived there for like 10 years plus. He doesn't live there anymore, but he's a visual effects artist, and he did the last like 2 Star Wars. He was the lead artist on the visual effects for the Star Wars movies. He worked on Snakes on a Plane and stuff like that. So that's my experience at San Luis Obispo.
Charles, do you have any experiences there?
Other than, I've only actually been there once as a kid. I had a relative go to school at Cal Poly, and so we went down to visit and then like took a tour of the town and stuff. And then ate at McClintock's Steakhouse. If you're ever going through there, it's a really good restaurant. It reminds me of the place in the John Candy movie, Great Outdoors, where he goes and he eats the giant steak. They have something like that there.
I also asked one of our good friends, Kristen, who listens to our podcast, and I think maybe one of the only times I've been to San Luis Obispo was to visit her, if there were any recommendations she had for the area. She said that for food, go to Firestone Grill, which I looked up, and it does have delicious barbecue, at least on the website. She also suggested the Farmers Market, which is on hold right now because of COVID, but it's usually on Thursdays. And I looked up pics of that. It looks it looks huge, more like a fair. The last thing she said to do was to go to Sunset Drive-In Movie, and it looks like that is either open or will be reopening after the virus. So
it's an actual drive-in movie theater?
Yes, yeah. It looked really cool. On Saturday, August 24th, 1991, Marina Ruggiero was 20 years old and living in San Pedro, California. That weekend, she got into a car with her parents, John and Maria, and her sister Carmela, to head to San Luis Obispo to attend a wedding. This would have been about a 3.5 to 4 hour trip north from San Pedro to San Luis Obispo, and the most likely way to go would have been on the famed U.S. Route 101, or just the 101 as we say here. It would have been a really beautiful trip in August, and the drive would have hugged the Pacific Ocean coastline along the way. The high temperature in San Luis Obispo on the 24th was 79 degrees. The reason for the family trip was a happy one. Marina's good friend and longtime neighbor to the Ruggiero family was getting married. The childhood friend had lived with her family on the same block as the Ruggieros for 15 years, but had moved away to attend college at California Polytechnic State University, better known as Cal Poly. At some point, the rest of her family moved as well, so this was not only a chance to celebrate a happy occasion for their friend, but to catch up with her family as well. Unlike her neighbor, Marina had stayed in San Pedro, her hometown, and a community inside Los Angeles County and very near Long Beach, California. And just to cut off any criticism here of how we pronounce the town of San Pedro, I did look it up, and what I learned is that it's pronounced differently depending where in California you're from. So San Pedro is right next to Los Angeles, and the people in San Pedro say San Pedro, but much of the rest of Los Angeles pronounces it San Pedro, and this can cause issues for locals who like their town pronounced correctly. Those were their words. In 1991, Marina was attending El Camino College in Torrance, California, after graduating Bishop Montgomery High School in 1988. Torrance is about 17 miles north of San Pedro. She was also working full-time as an office manager at a business called Lens Technology. Once the family arrived on August 24th, 1991, in San Luis Obispo, they checked into the Cuesta Canyon Lodge at 1800 Monterey Street, not far from the Mill Street Historic District in San Luis Obispo. The lodge, which sat on the corner of Monterey Street and Grand Avenue, is less than a mile from US 101 and sits amidst several other hotels in the area. The hotel has changed owners a couple of times since then, and it's now called the Kinney. Marina and her sister were given room 327 on the 3rd floor and would share the room while their parents would share a different hotel room. The picture of the outside of room 327, which comes from the Tribune, is taken in the hallway outside and facing the door. The door to room 327 is closed, and the door next to it, to what looks like an adjoining room, is open, and an investigator is inside. There's carpet on the ground in the hallway, so I believe the rooms are in an enclosed hallway. Room 327 is the last door, and to the right of it is a wall, so it is the last room in that hallway. I can't tell if there are other rooms if you were able to walk to the right, for instance. It looks like maybe the carpet goes a little farther that direction, so another hallway may sit at a right angle. There's a white placard on the door, like a do not disturb sign, and I don't know if Marina or her sister put it there or if later that's something police do when they take the photo. And we'll have this photo up on our website at californiatruecrime.com. I also don't know where the parents had their room. It may have been next door. The room next to 327, as I said, is connected with an inside door, as a lot of hotel rooms have. So it seems plausible they might have had that room, but I don't know for sure. The two sisters were given a single key to the room, And the picture also shows the kind of lock that's on the door. It's a physical key that you would use, not a key card. So the door has a round doorknob with a top lock separate above it. And I was interested by this because I know it's 1991, but I can't remember the last time I used a physical key in a hotel. And I think, Charles, you looked some stuff up about hotel security and hotel keys.
Yeah, I actually, when we initially started talking about this and looking at the pictures, I was struck by the same thing. It'd been a long time since I've actually had an actual key to a hotel, especially someplace like that was a little bit more upscale and nice. The physical keys actually go back, obviously, for a long time. But when it comes to hotel keys, keys were used really, physical keys were used up until the mid to late 70s. The problem with them always comes from the idea of if you lose your key, you have to have that lock rekeyed and have a new key made. And it became, an extra added expense. So what people moved to was something called a punch card. So if you think of like a slightly larger than a credit card that had raised bumps on it or holes, and what you do is you slide that into the lock and it lines up with the punches and it opens up your door. Those were jump in front of keys because it was cheaper. They were a lot easier to carry than a key, but you still have the same problem. If you lose the punch card, you have to have a mechanism repunched and have to have a new card.
Do you know how safe it was with those punch cards? Were they easily copied?
No, actually, they weren't, because I did a little research and I found out that a punch card has a total of 32 possible holes. So when combined with the locks, it's 4.2 billion combinations that each individual card could have. So It is an actual... in that respect, it's safer, or I won't say it's safer than an actual lock, but it's potentially as safe in actually having a physical lock and key. So then that really carries us almost to the mid to late 80s. And that's when we start getting magnetic stripe cards or mag stripe cards. So I think most people have seen this. They look like a credit card or an ATM card. They have a magnetic strip on the back. And what was interesting, I found out is, and again, if you're listening to this, you're probably like us and find all of this stuff kind of interesting, but it wasn't originally created for door locks. The hotel industry took a look at what banking was doing with the ATMs and the magnetic strips and took that technology and adopted it to the door lock. The main advantage was it was super cost effective because it didn't matter if you had that key or not. If you lost it, they could just remagnetize or recode a throwaway card. It was also a lot easier to carry. You put it in your wallet or your purse. The problem too, though, is this was not necessarily as secure as the punch card, because early on people found ways to hack the magnetic strip and gain entry to your hotel rooms, which really kind of freaked me out when I read that, because I always thought they were a lot more secure. And then the next evolution now has gone from mag strips, and I've not really seen a place that had this yet. I don't stay in a lot of higher end hotels, but the next evolution is RFID chips. So you don't actually put anything into a lock. You bring your card key, so to speak, close to the lock and it will open it up. So most people, if you work in a place that has a badge, my job, I have a badge that I have to swipe in front of a door to open it up. That's an RFID chip.
It's not that, I don't think you have to do that high end. Maybe you just stay at the worst hotels. But
that is true. I am a bargain hunter.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm like a Best Western guy because of the rewards you get from it. They're great. We stayed at Monterey recently, and they have that where I love it because I just keep it in my wallet and I just have to hold my wallet up to the door.
I thought this was kind of interesting too, because I never really thought that because of the hotel industry taking these mag strips from banks, there's a lot of your information, I won't say a lot, but there is some of your personal information coded on those regular magnetic strip cards that you get from a hotel. With an RFID chip, there's no personal data. It's harder to hack those. For a hacker to get close and open up your door, they actually have to be very, very close to your door to interfere with the signal. So it seems like of any of them, it's probably one of the more safer ways of locking your motels or hotels.
So the family arrives on Saturday, the 24th, but the wedding wasn't taking place until the next day on Sunday. So after they check in, they have the rest of the day to kind of sightsee, hang around. And they did something that Sean already mentioned and is really common here in California because they do visit the San Luis Obispo mission that day. And missions are a really big part of California history. When the Spanish came to California in the late 1700s, they established 21 Catholic missions up and down the coast. And in these places, they began to farm, to create places to live. And they did actually a lot of really terrible things. But their imprint lasted in California. So in school, we all had to build missions. And I'm assuming Sean did because we were in the 4th grade together. Do you remember what mission you did?
No, because I just remember that I didn't want to do it, and I did the last minute, and I just remember being so scared that I was going to drop it. That's the only, I don't remember anything else except that it's flimsy cardboard, and I don't want to drop all of these sugar cubes.
Now, kids nowadays I see have like whole things they can buy to make them. We just had to use random household stuff.
Yeah, Michael sells mission kits.
What?
Yeah. Wow. Although I think it's nice on that note, the missions in California, if you're not from California, you might not know this. I think most of us that live in California know the complex relationship that the missions have with the indigenous population and a lot of the terrible things that went on when you deal with colonialism. I've seen a lot of schools now give kids the option of doing an indigenous village or structure or the mission. So they try to balance the discussion of teaching missions with teaching Native Americans.
So when I read that they had gone to the mission, it sprung a chord because whenever we traveled anywhere, if there was a mission near for years, we always went to it. Just a California thing to do, I guess. According to the newspaper, the family also visited and shopped at Morro Bay. I've never been to Morro Bay. Charles, I think you've been there.
No, I have never been. My family, especially my uncle and aunt, a lot of my cousins, that was their favorite vacation spot. So that was a place that they would go every year for years and years and years. Go down to the water and actually fish for crabs. They would go out on the pier and take out a bucket of guts and put it in crab traps and then take it back to their motel rooms. And
on Sunday, August 25th, 1991, the Ruggiero family, including Marina, attended the wedding of their friend. Marina, who was an Italian-American and is described by the newspaper as having dark hair and features that could make her a model, wore a burgundy knee-length skirt with black nylons, black shoes, a black tank top, and a matching burgundy suit jacket to the wedding. In the Tribune, Marina is described as, quote, a petite woman, an exotic-looking Italian-American girl, beautiful enough to be a model. After the ceremony, the wedding party and their guests retreated to the Monday Club. The Monday Club is a beautiful location for a wedding. We'll have a link to it on our site. It's got beautiful building and gardens. And the building was designed in the 1930s by a famous architect named Julia Morgan. Morgan is also who designed Hearst Castle. The Monday Club sits at 1815 Monterey Street in San Luis Obispo, and according to the Tribune, was just across the street from the Cuesta Caña Lodge. They described it as about a few hundred feet away from Marina's hotel room. Nothing out of the ordinary happened at the wedding or the reception. Everyone interviewed in the newspaper claimed both went off, quote, without a hitch. Marina, along with her family, seemed to have a good time. Along with others, she danced at the event. Around 9 p.m., the reception began to wind down and people started to leave. The Ruggiero family, along with the family of the bride, decided to go to another location for what the Tribune described as an intimate gathering. Marina agreed to go, but she first wanted to change her clothes. Her family stayed behind to help clean up while Marina walked across the street to her hotel room to change. She left by herself with the single key for the room at 9 p.m. Again, no one had any reason to suspect Marina wouldn't be safe walking across and alone to her room. They were in a safe area, and the room was just a few hundred feet away. It would be the last time anyone was able to talk to Marina. As the time neared 11 p.m., the Ruggiero family began to wonder why Marina had not returned after changing her clothes. So the next part, I saw two different accounts. Either Marina's mother and sister decided to go across the street to check on her, or just her sister went. But when Marina's sister got to their door and tried to open it, the door was locked. She then knocked on the door and received no answer. Assuming her sister had fallen asleep when she went to change, she walked down to the front desk to obtain another key. She arrived back at the room, used the key to open the door. Inside the room, Marina was laying on her back, straight out, with a towel draped over her face, and bleeding from stab wounds on the upper body. She was alive, but unresponsive. Her sister alerted her family and anyone in the area. In a very short time, there were a lot of people that came in, both inside and outside the room. Emergency services were called, and while they waited, resuscitation efforts were begun. In an article in 2011 titled San Luis Obispo Police Taking Another Look at 1991 Slaying of San Pedro Woman, Marina's sister described finding her body. Quote, "Shock set in right away. It was hard to get your mind around what you were seeing." An ambulance took Marina to the hospital, and at 12:30 a.m., a priest was called to perform last rites. Father John Wadovich came to the hospital. He's actually the priest from the San Luis Obispo mission, the same one Marina had visited just the day before. He performed last rites, and shortly after, Marina was pronounced dead. Back at the hotel, detectives and police arrived to begin a murder investigation. The room was cordoned off, and the entire third floor was cleared. However, this case would be far more complicated than just gathering evidence inside the room. The police would need to interview 3 floors of hotel guests, as well as an entire wedding guest list, all of which would take months. So this first night is just the beginning. What was immediately clear is that police didn't know how someone got into the room or how they left. And this part is a little less clear, and there are differing accounts, especially over the years in the newspaper. We don't have a trial to go off of where evidence is being presented, but we want to give you all the information we can, so hopefully it won't get too confusing. One of the big questions is how whoever killed her got in and out of the room. The door was locked. And remember, this is a top lock, so the locking mechanism can only be locked on the inside by hand or on the outside by key. Most of the newspapers say there was no evidence that anyone had gotten into the room by force. However, in an article in the Tribune in 2010, titled Marina Ruggiero Found Dead in Her San Luis Obispo Motel Room in 1991, it says there were pry marks on the door. It does not indicate whether police believe that they were there before or that they were actually used in any way to get into the room. The picture that we have is black and white, so it's hard to tell, but there doesn't seem to be pry marks where someone actually pushed open the door.
What about the windows? I know that usually there's like a front window, and then there's always the tiny bathroom window that's, I mean, not everywhere, but some places have, especially older ones, have that tiny bathroom one by the shower.
Yeah, I didn't see anything about a window, and the picture we have is from the outside of the room, so I don't know if there are windows. They were on the 3rd floor, and as we said, we don't have all the information because police, they haven't arrested someone and presented a case, but
right
in the paper they do talk about how they don't know how they got in and out, so I'm not too sure, but I think it's a good question.
Same for like a adjoining room where there's a door usually connected to another room. I wonder if they...
Oh yeah, did they check to see if the joining room was unlocked? The front door of the joining room.
That's the room, and you guys can look up at the picture that we put online, but that's the room that it looks like they're starting their investigation from. So I imagine they probably...
cleared that first before...
cleared it or took evidence. I do know they took a lot of evidence. They still have a lot of evidence they're constantly sending in to get fingerprints or DNA from. So I can't say for sure, but...
Yeah, because it's hard, like going back to what you said about that you don't know if the parents were next door. Let's just say they were. They probably would have those two joining room doors unlocked and opened. So if that front door is locked on hers, they could have, whoever murdered her, easily gone next door and gone out that door if that was unlocked. But you don't have that. It doesn't say,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
And on top of which, the collection of evidence at a hotel that, I mean, I think we've all seen those Dateline things that talk about like cleanliness in public hotels or motels. The amount of people that going through a place like this, that's kind of a tourist destination, it's got to be staggering, the amount of fingerprints you have to eliminate and hair and fiber evidence you have to eliminate.
There was also no evidence that someone had gotten into the room by force. So I don't know, again, if those pry marks prove that someone tried or if they were just there from before, but that's what the newspaper says. And the room itself did not look as if someone had been there to take anything. It wasn't ransacked, and family confirmed that nothing was taken. Looking at the state of the room and the victim, police determined she had been back in the room for some time before she was attacked, but no one in the vicinity heard anything out of the ordinary. No one heard screams or yelling, no loud noises at all, which might find weird, but after we've covered so many cases, seems to be kind of a common thing.
Mm-hmm.
In the same article with the pry marks, it stated that it appeared that Marina had been grabbed by her murderer from behind, and the cloth was used as a gagging device. It also stated that police think whoever murdered her might have been waiting inside the room before she got there. With not much to go on, police began collecting all the information they could. They collected the license plate numbers from the hotel's parking area, as well as any cars on the street or in the vicinity. But no one came forward to say they saw Marina outside the hotel. No one saw her walking from the wedding over there. No one saw her going inside the hotel to her room. One of the things I did find interesting was that the press was on site and tried to get interviews with hotel employees. And we've seen this in a lot of cases. They're trying to get to the story. They didn't find anyone who was willing to talk with them, which I took as a kind of a really respectful thing to do, that they were, they're not going to talk about what happened. But Sean, you had a different reason, which I thought was really good.
Well, yeah, I mean, thinking about it, it's like, if it's locked from the inside, did they ever find her key?
It never says anything about that key. It's one of the things I would be most interested in, because if they find it inside, then I think that would be a pretty big deal. But they never mention when they get inside, if it's missing, if it's gone, if someone took it. It's never in the paper.
Okay, but thinking of that, it's like, if her sister has a key and she has a key, who else would have a key to the room? And that might be hotel employees. They might have a master key. Whoever, I mean, obviously there's a master key. You have cleaning services that go in during the day and everything like that. So it could be that. It could be that keys are, it might not be hotel. It might be someone, friends of a hotel who likes to rob the hotel guests. Who knows? I mean, it could be anything, but as it's locked from the inside, it does feel like it could be. There's no reason to rule out hotel employees.
Yeah, and I don't know what kind of key that the sister was given when she went down to the front when she couldn't get in. If it was another key altogether, or like you're saying, a master key. I didn't even think of that.
Well, I mean, you'd usually have spare keys for those rooms, because if we talked about earlier, the economics of it, you want to make sure in case something happens, you don't have to go out and carve one right away. I also think it's kind of interesting that they wouldn't talk, but we have talked about before the idea that if they are looking at us at Adam as suspects, maybe they didn't want to talk to him until they talk to a lawyer, kind of thing. I'm worried that they don't have a suspect. We're all employees. The first people they're going to look at is us. I'm not saying anything until I get a lawyer.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that, because we've seen in a lot of cases, there's always, even in those circumstances, someone. A lot of people work at a hotel. The fact that no one spoke, I found really interesting.
Another thing that could be is that just by observation, people who are hotel employees could be undocumented workers and they were scared for themselves.
Yeah, there could be a lot of, that's a good idea. There could be a lot of reasons why they wouldn't want to talk to a journalist or trust them or police.
Right, and they just want to stay away from it altogether and not be there.
So although much of the specifics of the case have been held quiet by police over the years, as an unsolved case, they have to decide what information should be released in the hope someone will recognize something versus releasing too much and losing edge on whoever did this, or being able to even confirm if someone were to come forward and say they did it, to be able to confirm it, which just must be a really hard decision for police to have to make when you don't have leads. It's been a long time now, but there's still not a lot of information.
Because you're constantly doing that mental math of, we have, say, for example, 10 pieces of evidence that we've held back. And maybe if we release one or two, we might get some bites. And how long do you go before you release that? And especially in this day and age, when between the internet and the popularity of true crime and people, hashing and this stuff out and talking about it on discussion boards, and people that have podcasts going back over it, that any piece of information could be helpful, but then that also might dilute or give you problems later when you're looking for a conviction.
My name is Paige, and I'm the host of Reverie True Crime. Reverie means to daydream, but even daydreams can become nightmares. Come join me and get lost in horrific reverie about true crimes and eerie events. Reverie True Crime Podcast, available wherever you stream your favorite podcasts.
An autopsy was performed, and in this case it didn't provide answers, just more questions. Marina had been stabbed, it says multiple times, but it was a single stab wound that went directly through her heart that resulted in her death. There was no evidence of sexual assault, ruling out another possible motive for the crime.
Just because there was no evidence of sexual assault, can they really rule it out? Because what if, let's say the person said, scream, said don't scream or something like that, and then she started freaking out, and then the murderer actually just murdered instead of sexually assaulting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm just been writing a case in San Francisco, or the San Francisco area, where that happened, where they now caught the person and he has a long history of sexual assault. But in the case I'm covering, he didn't sexually assault in that case, and they believe instead, because she fought back, he murdered her instead and wasn't able to do that. So that's always a possibility. I think last year when we talked a lot about the Steven Steiner stuff, we kind of went over how sometimes it's not easy to tell if someone's been sexually assaulted.
Right.
Or if someone has a different kind of fantasy where the action isn't part of it, but it's still sexually driven. So I don't know that they can rule that entirely, but in 1991, that's what they went with.
It's also, I wonder if it's possible that the police might have held some of that back as potential evidence for a future suspect.
Yeah, that's possible too. I don't know. Immediately, there were far more questions than answers. The first being, who would do this? Someone went to the trouble of covering her face, something that would be indicative of a personal connection. But there was no one in San Luis Obispo that really fit that description. The wedding they attended, they came because they knew the family and the bride. They didn't really seem to know anyone else in the area or visit anyone else. She did have a boyfriend of 3 years at the time, but during that weekend, the family was at the wedding. He was on a surfing trip to Mexico. He had not gone to San Luis Obispo because it was a family trip, and he was not in the area at the time of the murder. The police never say in any way that he's a suspect or a person of interest, so I think they're able to follow up on his alibi pretty quickly, and in later years, he talks to the press as well. It also appeared that Marina's body was placed on the bed in a very straight position. Police tell the newspaper this didn't seem to be a natural position for someone who has been attacked. So it could be that was a decision by the killer, something they needed to do. The only thing I would say for that is that we haven't obviously seen pictures of the body, but based on the descriptions of what happened in the paper, it sounds like a lot of people were in that room before police ever got there. And they tried to resuscitate her. EMTs were there.
So how much of that was what the killer laid her out presenting her, or how much of that was her sister or mother or family member or EMT trying to resuscitate her and putting her arms down by her side as to get him out of the way?
Yeah, and like they have way more information than we do, so I haven't seen much in recent years about that, but in the early newspaper clips, there's a lot about that. After some investigation, police are still unsure how or when Marina interacted with her killer. Did someone lay in wait? Did someone come across her as she was walking from the hotel or to the hotel from the wedding? Whoever did this and how they entered and exited the room, if police have any answers to that, it's not something they've shared with the public. Also, a murder weapon is never found. An article in the Times Press Recorder from 1991 quotes a police captain, Chelquist, saying she was murdered between 9:30 and 10 p.m. On Friday, August 30th, 1991, just 5 days after Marina was found murdered, and 6 days after the Ruggiero family had traveled to San Luis Obispo to celebrate the wedding of a loved one, the family was burying their daughter. Mass was held at Holy Trinity Catholic Church in San Pedro, and then Marina Ruggiero was laid to rest at Green Hills Memorial Park in Rancho Palos Verdes. At least 8 detectives were assigned to the case initially, and over the years, thousands of man-hours have been put into the case. For months, they interviewed people and asked the public for anyone who saw Marina on the day she was murdered to come forward, but none of this produced any leads. Without leads, the detectives went to the Department of Justice to have a profile built on the kind of murderer who might have committed this crime. One was created, but it was never released to the public. One of the detectives said that it wasn't really an earth-shattering profile. It was basically what you might expect. The case goes silent for some time. Then in June of 1994, at 10:30 a.m., police in San Luis Obispo were called to a parking lot described as, quote, undeveloped, across from Cuesta Canyon Lodge at 1845 Monterey Street. In the lot, a serrated knife had been discovered with what appeared to be blood on it. The police tell the press that they don't have any reason to think that the knife was involved in the murder of Marina. But it was found across the street from where a murder took place, so they have to look into it. And when you look at a map now, this area is really developed with lots of hotels and housing. There's several hotels on the same strip. During the 1990s, at least based on the description of this area in the newspaper, it sounded a lot less built up. And it's in the area of Cuesta Canyon, so there's a lot of undeveloped area. But even now, directly across the street, there's another motel, and behind it is San Luis Obispo Creek. And we'll put a picture up, but there's a lot of trees and brush. Looks like a place you might go hiking. And that brush can be really thick and something, I think it really could be lost without finding it for several years.
That's assuming that the person didn't take it with them.
Right. I mean, we have no idea what happened to that weapon.
Right.
So they have to check everything out.
Yeah, exactly.
The police also noted, and this is the first time I could find the wounds that Marina suffered described, but the police don't think she was stabbed with a serrated knife. Although a detective said there's always the possibility a knife could have been used in a way they didn't quite expect, maybe using it on its side or superficially. Basically, they don't read too much in the finding of the knife, but detectives are doing what they're supposed to. If there's even a hint of a lead, they're going to follow it. And a murder weapon is never found, so this seems like a pretty good strategy when you have no information. Mm-hmm. The knife is sent to Sacramento to the State Department of Justice for testing. They look for fingerprints, they check the blood. It's 1994, so probably some early DNA testing. There isn't any information on the outcome of this, but in a Modesto Beat article from 2019, it says that the knife had been ruled out as one used in the murder. In 1994, the Ruggiero family also sued Cuesta Canyon Lodge because they believed that they did not provide a safe and secure environment. We talked a little bit about hotel security with the cards and the keys. What do you guys think about the hotel being at least partially responsible for this murder?
That's a tough one. I kind of lean towards if there's no evidence that the door was forced and it was locked from the inside, it makes sense that the only way they could have gotten in was using a key. And to me, that lies on the fault of the motel in order to secure those keys. One thing that really caught me on reading about the hotel keys was I had really forgotten how unsafe. And some of you guys that are listening to this may remember as kids going to a motel or a hotel and filling out actual paper document, like signing your name to the book and they hand you the key, and how unsecure a lot of these places were. And now this is 1991, but I think some of the pictures we looked at the motel, it was not run down, but it wasn't like a state of the art place.
Well, I remember I took a trip to Disneyland with a friend, and we stayed at a hotel by there, and we're trying to go to sleep, and then all of a sudden, a family starts walking into our hotel room, and they had just told them, "Oh, this is vacant," and gave them keys to our room. So I went down there and I yelled, went back to sleep after I got my money back for the night. So I got a free hotel room. But nothing happened except that they totally screwed up and let someone else into our room. So, I don't know if they were really like vetting. Like, let's just say, hypothetical person, they see Marina go into the room and this person just goes, "Oh, I lost my key to room, blah, blah, blah. Can I get another?" Without checking anything, like the front desk people, and just gave that person a key. I don't know if they checked how many keys they had for that room, the detectives after, but it could have been, that might be where this whole security thing comes in. It could have just been easy to get a new key.
Yeah, and this trial never goes to a courtroom either. So I don't have full information for what they thought was unsafe. Like you're saying, keys might not have been protected securely. There might not even be lights in the places where they should be, stuff like that. So it's really hard to tell.
I think it's also heartbreaking too, because you imagine that the family they have this huge hole. Obviously, their daughter's been killed, but they also have no closure. There's no one arrested. This is 3 years later, and they're still looking for answers, and nobody can seem to give them. So I see the hotel being a surrogate for the actual murderer in a way.
And I did try to look up how common it is to be a victim of violence or even just a robbery or something at a hotel, but I couldn't really find statistics on it. What I did find was some stuff that said hotels try and keep that pretty secret. Hotels don't want you to feel like you're unsafe. I know there's several stories of bad things happening at hotels and motels. We covered the Stainer case last year. Right. I think the Night Stalker did some things in hotels. I don't think that's the norm, but it's hard to know exactly what's going on in hotels. What I also found interesting about the civil case, and it wasn't something I had thought of before, we've seen civil cases in several other crimes where someone hasn't been held responsible as a way of almost getting information about that crime. I think that happened in the O.J. Simpson case, for instance. But here, the police can't participate in the civil case because they can't give any information. So that really hinders this case from the get-go.
So what you're saying is, like, or in this case, the Ruggiero family suing the hotel, and one of them would go to the police and say, "We're suing these people. We need evidence," or that. And the police is the police saying that we can't because it's an open, or we won't because it's an open case?
Both. Yeah, they can't. What? They can't give information about what they know, any evidence. They don't want that leaked or told in public, and so they are unable to assist in this case, which obviously hinders their civil case. In the end, the hotel settles with the family for $80,000.
Do we know if that's really low, or do we know how much the original civil case was?
I do not know.
Okay.
How much they wanted.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if like 80,000 off of like 4.4 million or something like that. Just wondering.
Yeah.
Because if they have no evidence, who knows?
The case goes cold, and over the years, in the newspaper, there seems to be disagreement between detectives who've worked on the case. One says they can't give information because the case is still ongoing and they have a possible suspect that they haven't interviewed yet. Another detective basically calls this nonsense and says the case isn't going anywhere. They don't have information and they're stuck. He tells the press that what they need is information and someone to come forward. And this is not the first case we've covered like this. In fact, many of our cold cases are cases in which police say they need someone to come forward, a witness, someone who's heard something, and they're hoping someone's conscience gets to them, or maybe they have information and we're afraid to share it at first, and years go by and they won't be so afraid. This case is unlike many we've covered. We've talked a lot about how families feel and what they go through when someone is murdered, but in the majority of cases we've covered, they at least have some answers. Although I will say when looking up information, I found that getting answers or even a guilty verdict doesn't actually help people psychologically as much as we might hope or think. But in this case, this is a family who has no answers. I mean, there's no why, there's no how, there's barely a when, they have no idea who, there's no motive, and these are all questions that no one seems capable of answering. In an article in the Daily Breeze on September 7th, 2011, 20 years later, Marina Ruggiero's father talks about the toll this has taken on their lives. There's a moment that reminded me of Kara Knott's family when Marina's mother cancels her newspaper because just going to her yard every day and the possibility that there might be a front page article about her daughter is just, it's too much. The whole family went through a lot of anger. It says they needed counseling to deal with these feelings. And I just don't know how people deal with this when there's just no end in sight. How do you get back to your life? Just always waiting for information.
I can't even possibly think how to deal with anything like this. It would be so hard. Family member, the father, the mother, sister, it's the boyfriend. I mean, the boyfriend who, he probably moves on because he's not technically part of the family. It's always still there with him, wondering.
Well, and think about the two people that got married. What a pallor that puts over your marriage. Every anniversary is not just your anniversary, but it's the anniversary of your
Right.
being murdered at your wedding. We've said it a lot, but I think it always bears repeating that these crimes are not just against the victims, but these crimes are against the entire families and loved ones and bigger communities. I mean, think about her friends at school and she's taken away from all of this, and there's nothing you can point to, no shred of evidence, that is public anyway, that the parents can look for hope.
Yeah, and I did see in a news article where her boyfriend talked a lot about, they had been discussing marriage and had talked about their future, whether they were ready to do that soon or not, but obviously, like you said, Sean, really affected his life. The article I saw, he said he'd never even been to San Luis Obispo just because psychologically it would just be too much for him to go there. So this really has obviously long-lasting effects. Her father also said that they keep hope alive, but after 5 years went by, they began to accept that they may never have answers about what happened to their daughter. And I think a lot of grief we hear about is about acceptance. This is just another kind of acceptance. Not that someone's no longer with you, but just that you'll never have answers to these it must be very hard, these pressing questions, as you guys said. The family in this case stopped talking with the press, which is really understandable. I think in a lot of true crime things and on things like Dateline that we watch, there are a lot of people who are highlighted, who are left behind. They go out, they try to find answers on their own, they keep up the fight, and I really think that's amazing. But I also think it's important to highlight the different ways people grieve and handle things. Not everyone is Sam Knott, for instance. And that's completely okay and completely normal way of handling a murdered daughter, the way that Sam Knott does. But it's also okay the way this family handles it. Survival is unique to all of us. And if you can't get out of bed, that seems right to me. If you have to go change a bunch of laws, that makes sense. I just think it's good to highlight people who do things a little differently.
I think it goes back to what we talked to even about when people are interviewed by the police and that common refrain. And I know we've said that a million times, or feels like a million times. There's no right way to grieve. People act differently, and that has to be given credence and paid attention to, because I can see compartmentalizing it and saying, for the good of our family, we have to accept and move on, or it will kill us. Or the other side is I'm never going to get over it. How would you ever get over a murdered daughter or a murdered sister?
In the same article we talked about from 2011, the police announced that they're still looking into the case. They hope that advances in DNA or fingerprint technology might help them find a lead, and they continue to send evidence to the crime lab in Sacramento. They also stress that this might not be a case that's answered with technology, in part because so many people were in the room the night of the murder, and then as well as hotel people like you guys were talking about, maids, that kind of thing. There were a lot of people in and out, and DNA just might not solve this case. What they're hoping for is that time will. That time will mean someone who was scared can finally come forward, and if there's a commonality between a lot of the cold cases we talked about, that's something we've seen a lot. Do you guys have any last thoughts on this case?
No, I just, this is it's a hard one because there's so many ifs and there's not a lot of information and it's hard. I'm hoping the police have information. Like as we've been talking about this case, I'm just wondering if the whole thing, if the detectives or whatever are scared of a witch hunt. Their evidence might be very broad, which then people will be like, it's this person, and then you get a lot of people who might not have anything to do with it, and their lives are kind of ruined. I mean, you've seen it before and stuff like that. So I'm not sure what they actually have, and I hope that they did interview this person that they said that were, it was back and forth with, we have a suspect, we just haven't interviewed them, and then the other person said no, but I don't know. It's just really hard. You just really wish you could get some closure for this family, and like you were talking about, Charles, like the people that got married. There's a lot of people involved here. All the people at that wedding and reception will remember this with the wedding.
I takes me back to when you first brought this case up, Jessica, and I know we read it and went over it. And I think all of us, I think we spent at least 4 or 5 hours that evening going over every detail and looking at it and looking at photographs and discussing what could have happened and what could happen. And it caught me that that's the same feeling that this family's been dealing with for over 20 years. And again, like you guys have said, it's just saying it again. This is another example of a really hard one because there is no resolution. So hopefully somebody somewhere comes out and says something, or maybe remember something, or listening to this or somebody talking about it. But I think anytime the more people are talking about these cases, especially the ones that aren't getting a lot of headlines, the better it is.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think when you're not talking about, someone might have, I just keep going back to that, someone might have information they don't even realize is important because they've never heard this case. Maybe someone said something to them, told them a story, and they just laughed it off because they don't have the details. And if they hear the details, they can put 2 and 2 together. But it's like so many cases, it just hasn't gotten a lot of attention. And I know the police are working very hard on it. That's without question, but lots of people should be able to hear about who Marina was and what happened to her. In the almost 29 years since Marina Ruggiero was murdered, the police have hunted down every lead, no matter how tiny in the case. Every year they do an annual review to see if any new information has come forward. In the intervening years, the quest to Canyon Lodge has changed to the Holiday Inn Express, to now the Kinney. But despite the change, one thing remains the same. Police and the Ruggiero family still don't have answers in their daughter's death. Marina was described as quiet, kind, loyal, a good friend, and a wonderful person by the people who knew and loved her. She also loved animals and was thinking about a career where she could work with them. Her father told the Tribune that she was, quote, an avid reader, liked to go to concerts and do things normal 20-year-olds would do. Marina had her whole life in front of her when someone else took it from her. Her family are also victims in this case, from discovering the body to living without their daughter to living each day grieving what might have been. In the Tribune, Sergeant Tom Dupree said of the case, quote, I think we ended the case fairly frustrated. We covered all the avenues. It's tough. It seemed like a senseless crime. We just couldn't put together an exact motive. All of these people deserve justice, But if all anyone can give them is an answer to what happened, then that's something. If you or someone you know has information in this case, then you have the power to ease the suffering, even just a little, of this family. You can come forward by calling the San Luis Obispo Crime Stoppers at 805-549-7867 or the San Luis Obispo Police Department. There is currently a $5,000 reward for information leading to a conviction in this case.
Our cold case for this episode happened on October 23rd, 2011, when a biker found a man at the base of the Madonna Mountain on the Lemon Drop Grove Loop Trail in Cerro San Luis Obispo. Cerro San Luis Obispo is a mountain in San Luis Obispo and part of a chain of volcanic mountains known as the Nine Sisters. It is a common place for biking and hiking in the area. When police arrived, they found 63-year-old Charles Lavinson deceased at the bottom of the mountain near Lincoln and Mountain View Street in San Luis Obispo. He had wounds on his head and face from some sort of blunt object, like a bat or pipe. A weapon was not found. His death has been classified as a possible homicide, and police are looking for any information about Lavinson, and in particular what he did that day. Lavinson lived in San Luis Obispo at a retirement home called Judson Terrace. He was considered friendly, smart, and talkative. Lavinson spent a lot of time walking and hiking in the area, and residents say he often took the bus to Grover Beach, California, where he had a storage unit. He loved walking the beach by the ocean in the area or in Pismo Beach, and would often get a hotel room and stay the night in the area. Sandy Medhertz, who worked at Judson Terrace, described Lavinson in the Tribune. She said, quote, "Talking to him was like reading an encyclopedia. He was very intelligent and well-educated. He could talk about things that happened hundreds of years ago. He knew all the details and facts. He had once been a state park ranger and a librarian." Lavinson attended First Presbyterian Church, loved the outdoors, and is survived by a brother and sister. Police need information from anyone who saw Lavinson the day he was murdered so they can put together a timeline of events. They do know that at one point during the 23rd, he went to the Chase Bank in downtown San Luis Obispo and took out cash. They consider robbery to be a possible motive in his death. On the 23rd, Lavinson was wearing khaki pants, a button-up short-sleeve white shirt, and blue-striped and brown shoes with white shoelaces. He also had a plastic key card in his back pocket that police believe went to a hotel room. It was a nondescript card, and police do not know what hotel it went to. If you have any information in the death of Charles Lavinson, please contact San Luis Obispo Police at 805-781-7317 or via Crime Stoppers at 805-549-7867. There is currently a $2,500 reward in this case.
Thank you for listening to this episode of California True Crime. For our full list of our sources as well as more information on the case, head over to our webpage at californiatruecrime.com. You can also support the show by finding a link to our Patreon on this page, as well as the option for ad-free episodes if you're a Patreon supporter. You'll also find a link to our new web store where you can find California True Crime gear for sale. If you'd like to contact us, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cali True Crime. Facebook, we also have a discussion group that you can join. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review. It helps a lot. We'd like to thank our quality control engineer, Melanie Duncan. This was recorded for the last time at Chateau Walnut and at Snail Ranch Studios. This has been a production of Way Grimace.